going on, advocates? Welcome back to another episode of the Black Mental Health Podcast. I'm your host, Reg. Joined today with me is a person I respect, especially with the work that he does and the way he integrates religion into topics where people not even knowing that they're having a conversation that has nothing to do with religion. But I'll let you go and flow, and we'll flow right into it. I don't introduce nobody because I don't like forgetting credentials. So please let the people know who you are and what you do.
Well, first I want to say I'm glad to be here. I am glad that this podcast is advocating for Black men with regards to mental health. It's an important thing. I'm Pastor Leo Cunningham. I'm the senior pastor of Glenwood United Methodist Church, located on the west side of Columbus, Ohio. The credentials that I hold with regards to my ordination, I've got a bachelor's of communications from the University of Toledo. I have a master's of divinity and a master's of theological study from the Methodist Theological School in Ohio. I am currently working on my doctorate, global Christian leadership in the urban context. So in 2 years, roughly, I'll be the Dr. Leo.
So I always get confused at, is it in the setting that you're in that you, all right, so are you Dr. Leo or are you Pastor Leo? Are you Dr. Pastor Leo? Like, how does it get identified?
You know what? It's really it's a cultural thing and it's a generational thing.
Oh, okay.
So I serve in what our denomination, the United Methodist Church, the second largest Protestant denomination in the world, with 13 million members around the world. I'm in what they call cross-cultural, cross-racial appointment. So I am a Black pastor in charge of a majority white church. Those are some interesting dynamics. And so a lot of your European American congregations aren't as formal as a lot of your historical Black churches.
Okay.
So they'll refer to their pastor as the pastor and the pastor's first name. In some cases, they won't even use the word pastor. They'll just use the first name.
Oh, wow.
But then you've got the Black church tradition where a lot of your older Black people, it's always going to be the pastor and the last name. It's going to be Pastor Cunningham. But with, the younger generation, Millennials, the Zs, it's a lot of Pastor Leo. But Black people always make sure we're going to attach that title to you because of the historic cultural significance.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times, in a lot of your Black communities, your Black pastor has to serve as lawyer, health advocate. You play a lot of different parts. So it all kind of depends on the setting that I'm in. My dad was clergy. He was till I was about in the 6th grade, he was a police chaplain at the county jail. So when I got into parish ministry, which is, you've got a church, you're assigned to versus chaplaincy. So I didn't grow up like a lot of preachers' kids did. Because my dad didn't have a church. The jail, that was his church. I had a lot of, there was just some of these differences that show up. But Dad was Rev. If somebody called the house looking for my dad, they would call, and it would be is the Rev there? And so you figure out pretty fast, okay, this is somebody, it's either a cop or a criminal, because that's pretty much what I grew up around in my house. Police officers coming by, guys getting out of county jail, wanting to come and see my dad, keep up those relationships and whatnot. So Dad was Rev. He was Rev Cunningham. So when I got ordained, I was like, well, most people use the term pastor. I was like, I'm gonna be Pastor Cunningham. Reverend Cunningham is Dad.
It's took.
That title reserved. Yeah, it does. It all just kind of depends on the setting, the film, how levels of familiar. Are you in a formal setting or you're in an informal setting? if it's a public setting, a lot of times, we'll use full names. It'll be Pastor Cunningham, it'll be Pastor Leo. But when it's just a bunch of us sitting around, chopping it up, those formalities go away.
Yeah, no, and I just got into the habit, and we'll talk. I guess you'll bring it up during conversation of like giving Black professionals their credentials with their, like, it seems like when I used to go to the doctor, if you were a right professional, you were a doctor, or you earned a credential, it's like, hey, Dr. So and so. But when you have like, I don't want to feel comfortable just saying, hey, Leo. Like, you've earned credentials, but I guess that's that familiarity around he's relatable. So I can, take away the credentials that he earned. But I'm like retraining myself to say, all right, Pastor Leo, all right, Dr. Cunningham, as opposed, and it's to give you that respect for all of the work that you put in to earn that credential.
I appreciate that. I'm glad that's happening. But it's also sometimes, you got some people, they get a little credentials, they get a little something.
I think that's it.
And the heads get big, and they insist on being called so-and-so. And that's where that relationship piece, like I said, comes in. And it bugs some people. I know we've got a bishop, and our bishop is in charge of over 1,000 churches in our part of the state. And we'll be places in public, and it'll be Bishop Palmer. But there are times when we'll be at one of the retreats, and there just might be 5 or 6 of us sitting around talking. That's when every once in a while, if you have the relationship, you've got that permission, I may call him Greg in that situation. And so it's one of these things where, this is the podcast. We're being formal, Pastor Leo. But I ever get out to Philadelphia, and we playing spades.
Yeah,
I become Leo. And it's good. For me, I got people in my life who remember me from, junior. I still have friends from elementary school. So there are people who remember me before I left for seminary. They weren't surprised that I went to seminary, but they remember me before seminary. And it's good to have those people still around.
Yeah.
Keep you, to keep you,
they keep you honest.
Yeah, they do. They keep you honest. I have a lot of, I've got some fraternity brothers who have come, will be in town or whatnot, will come and hear me preach. And, I've had congregants come up to them and they're like, oh, Pastor Leo is so intense. He's so passionate. And I've had them say this to people. Really? Because we really think this Jesus thing has kind of watered him down. They're like, if you think this is intense, you should have seen him when he was an undergrad. You should have seen him in the early 90s. If you think this is amped up, they're like, we're all sitting here kind of like, wow, he's slowing down in his old age. So.
Nah, and I'm glad you went there, and I started the podcast introducing it like that. I think once you cross a certain threshold of in the congregation and in the church, you kind of people seem like you lose the other parts of you. And I think you do a very good job distinguishing like, hey, I am these other things as well. I am a Black man as well. I am a former fraternity or still fraternity member as well. I am a father, like those things. And I think the question is, and you can, again, I'll let you flow because you already know how to do this. How does a powerful Black man get in charge of an all-white, a majority white congregation? And not even the how, because it's not that you deserve it. How do you navigate that being who you are?
So the Methodist Church, so you've got, give some history here. So you've got AME, African Methodist Episcopal, AME Zion, CME. Anywhere you see that word Methodist show up, there's a system put in place to send pastors to churches. Your Baptist churches, yep, that's where I'm currently at. Your Baptist churches, your Lutheran churches, your Presbyterian churches do what is called, they place out a call. So you have to those churches will, for lack of a better term, they'll advertise for a pastor. We're looking for a pastor with these credentials. The pastor will come in, they might preach for 2 or 3 weeks, and then they decide, oh, this is what, we think we're going to hire this person on. Our system, because it's an Episcopal system, which means we have a bishop, we're assigned to churches. We're deployed like the military. We have a church that has this need. We have a pastor who has these qualifications. We're going to set up a meeting to see how you two are going to get along. But 9 times out of 10, there's no, well, we don't think this is going to work. We don't think this is going to work. I mean, that has happened. I've had 2 congregations that they have sent me to in 20 years where they were like, you can't send him here. You can't send the Black pastor to this congregation. This is not going to work. So we get deployed. You get, it's now a congregation can, as time goes on, can request a new pastor. A pastor can ask to be sent to a new church. In some cases, you'll have situations where the church hasn't asked for the pastor to move. The pastor hasn't asked to move, but something has happened in another city, and they realize the pastor we need for this situation in, so West Ohio is our region, 2/3 of the state. There are 8 districts. You can be in Toledo, Ohio, which is by the Ohio-Michigan border up by Lake Erie. And you can get a phone call from your district superintendent, like a district manager, who will let you know, says, hey, next 24 hours, the person in charge of, we call it the Ohio River Valley, it's basically Cincinnati, greater Cincinnati area, says, hey, in the next 24 hours, you can get a phone call from the pastor over an ORV. And that just lets you know something's happening, and we may, you're about to get sent to Cincinnati or something, in the Cincinnati area. So I've been lots of places. I have been places that I didn't know existed in the state of Ohio. So one of the things our denomination is trying to wrestle with, that I see it as a good problem to have, is what do you do when you have a denomination, one, that's global? So, but also the world has been changing. America demographically has been changing, but the United Methodist Church in America hasn't kept up with those demographic trends. Right. So West Ohio, we have just over 1,000 churches. But of those 1,000 churches, currently, we only have 18 that are African American out of 1,000 churches. But there are 55 African American pastors. We're going to end up in some white churches because numerically, there aren't enough places for us. Right. It's this commitment, some being self-aware. Not every, and we've got some Hispanic pastors in some white churches. We actually have one church he's in Cincinnati. White guy, European guy, Thomas, he's in charge of an African-American congregation. It's a smaller congregation, but he's got some other community activist kind of stuff. Boots on the ground. He's from New Orleans. But for a lot of us, this is where we're being told to go. And if this whole aspect about grace, mercy, and love is supposed to be true, then we should be able to navigate these situations. But this is America.
Okay.
This is
I was going to ask you that. I was going to get into that of like, all right, so now you get deployed into a church, you realize, well, you probably know the numbers just off of, like you said, just fear, supply and demand, like, what the numbers are going to look like, or your chances. But now you get there and you got to lead like a congregation that doesn't look like you. Again, that's separate from the Bible and religion, just human to human interaction. How do you relate? I don't even want to say relate. That's not the word I want to use. Like certain issues pop up, like with the coaches in the NFL right now. How does that conversation go? Because now you got to intertwine certain things as well.
Those conversations, it's situational that I've discovered. Some of those conversations have to be done in small groups. It's going to be Bible study. It's going to be, before COVID hit, going to lunch after church. Because from the pulpit, it's a monologue in what, 95% of most churches. You can't stop the pastor in the middle of a sermon and go, wait, I got a question. Mm-hmm. Although we did that one time with we were trying to start a new service. Excuse me. And we did some of those things. One, it's situational. Two, it's relational. But as Black people, a lot of us have just learned how to read a room very quickly.
Survival, we had to.
Yeah, exactly. It's a survival technique. You walk in pretty fast. You walk in pretty fast, and you try to figure out who's gonna, who your allies are, who are the individuals that you can have these conversations with. It's difficult, but I've got a lot of previous life experiences where academically, I might be the only Black person in the room.
No, I got you.
So it's like, oh, okay. Which was, for me, was very strange because I went to excuse me, I went to an all Black parochial school until the end of the third grade.
Okay. And you were able to learn some valuable lessons, no?
Well, I learned some lessons about being Black. But right. when the school closed,
okay,
I had to go to an integrated public school. Mm-hmm. And so the fourth grade was the first time I was ever in a classroom with anybody, with other students, because there were some white teachers at the school, because there are not enough Black people in education. That's a whole
different conversation. Yeah.
Second grade teacher was African American, Mrs. Williams. I remember her. But got to the fourth grade, and all of a sudden, I'm in a classroom with Mexican Americans, Italian Americans, Polish Americans. We got a part in Toledo where I'm from. It's called Polish Village. So went to school with a lot of Polish kids. There were we had some Lebanese kids in this public school. We actually had some people from Laos. So this would be early 80s. So this is a lot of your Southeast Asia, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam people relocated. So all of a sudden in the fourth grade, I'm sitting in rooms with people. I'm just like, I've only seen y'all on television. It's like, so that was an interesting culture shock. But when I had my first therapist 20 years ago, he and I were talking about these things. He talked about how, and I wish I could remember the name of the book, that when you are the ethnic minority in a country between the ages of 10 and 14, you make a decision about how you're going to navigate in that world. Mm-hmm. And we're having a conversation about race and identity. He is Indian American. His parents are from India. He was born in Ohio. And he talked about the mental shift that happens when he goes to India to visit his family versus what he's aware of when he's in America. Mm. And Richard Pryor talked about that experience the first time he went to Africa. And it took a few days to realize that nothing but Black people. Mm. And he talked about how it changed a lot of his perceptions and a lot of the language he would use and wouldn't use after being in Africa. And so he talked about how, my brothers had some identity issues when they went K through 6. And that's as far as the school went. So they hit integrated schools, junior high and high school. And they spent trying to figure out, how do I navigate this? Who do I associate with? How does which a lot of people go through when you're a teenager, when you're in 7th, 8th, 9th grade, you're trying to figure out who you are.
Right.
But then to take you and push you from this closed bubble, this African-American bubble, and then drop you during, essentially puberty into this integrated world, it can mess with your head. And he talked about that. He says, I don't think you're having a lot of these identity issues about where you fit in as a Black person in America because you got integrated in the 4th grade. Okay. You were younger. He said you also had older brothers to watch and navigate that. But by the time I got to high school, I was an honors student, and there might only be 3 of us in honors English. There might only be 3 Black people in honors world history. So you learn the term that they use now is code switch. Yeah. We were doing it, but we didn't have that. We didn't have that word. Right. And so you learn to try to start to navigate these these places and these spaces. I know my Black presence was one of the reasons I started college at Bowling Green State University. We had a student teacher, honors English. Her name was Michelle Cherry. She was our teacher she was Mr. Edwards' student teacher from BGSU. Bowling Green State University's got a really big education department. And she was talking one day about how there were no Black teachers in any of her classes. And a lot of us were just like, what do you mean are any Black teachers in any of the classes? And she's like, she goes, there aren't a lot of Black people in education. This would have been 88. And she said, matter of fact, there aren't a lot of Black people at the university. And I was like, what do you mean a lot of Black people? It's Bowling Green State University. And she was like, there may be 1,000 Black people, at the school. And she said, and there are a lot of students who come from small rural areas who have never met any Black people, went to school with any Black people, or know any Black people. This is inner city Toledo. At that point, the population was probably close to 400,000. We're floored. We're like, what do you mean there aren't any Black people? Toledo, for those who don't know the geography, Toledo is 45 minutes south of Detroit. We're 2.5 hours west of Cleveland. We're 5 hours east of Chicago. And we're like, what you mean there are places in the world that aren't any Black people don't know any I'm floored by that. And so, that was one of the reasons I ended up at Bowling Green State University. I was like, well, if they ain't no Black people, we need to fix it. There are Black people everywhere. So I'm going to go to school there. Right. And so I did. I showed up, but you learn to navigate these kinds of things. And some of those navigations are not easy. Some of those navigations are difficult. The family has been sent to some pretty wild places, and it's, Ohio is just such a strange state. Columbus, Ohio is almost in the middle of the state. But north of Columbus to Lake Erie is very New England, East Coast sensibilities. Everything south of Columbus, you've got Appalachia and you have Southern. So we've got West Virginia, the Appalachian Mountains on one part of the state. Then you've got Kentucky just on the other side of the Ohio River. It's Black History Month. Let's talk some history. If you could get across the Ohio River, if you were a slave, you were free. So Southern Ohio has always had this Appalachian Southern tension to it. They wanted to make the territory a slave's territory because at one point, Ohio was part of the Virginia colony. But the people from Northern Ohio coming out of New England, a lot of them were abolitionists. So you have a state that in a lot of ways, if you go too far south of Columbus, you can hear rural accents, Appalachian accents, Southern accents. North of Columbus, it's a very different kind. It's a very different vibe. I got a black pastor, a partner, homie, Greg, love him to death, originally from Chicago. And, you think about the Great Migration. So these people came from Mississippi. He's now at a church in Cleveland. He and I joke about this. He said, I've never seen so many black people play golf and tennis until I got to Cleveland. And I was like, what do you mean? And he was like, I've never seen, he was like, I don't understand it. I said, I've never seen this many black people into golf and tennis. He's like, I don't get it. I was like, man, that's a New England kind of a thing. And he was like, what? I said, yeah, man, when people came down through the Great Lakes, New York, Pennsylvania, and they settled in this northern part, they brought a lot of those things with them. And a lot of the black people, respectability politics, white collar, if this is where deals are being made, country clubs, tennis courts, golf, that's where black business people started doing those kinds of things. So yeah, so it's a strange state. One of the things though that I knew I had to do was, for lack of a better term, keep grounding myself in blackness.
I was gonna get to that question, but I said, you flowing in it, so I'm gonna let you flow. Why was it? The question was because I talked about it on the podcast before briefly, but when I started getting into the mental health work in like 2018, one of the things that I ran into with some organizations, and I'll talk about it on a later date, but they wanted me to take the black out of mental health. Like, you can talk about depression, anxiety, suicide ideation, all those things without utilizing that black connotation with it. Even with my podcast, they would rather have been the mental health podcast as opposed to the black mental health podcast. It was supposed to be not a unique qualifier for it. So why was it important for you to separate being black from being a pastor in that sense and being in the congregation? Like, why was it important for you to, make sure you ground yourself in that?
Our historic experience requires it, because we approach it from a different lens. A lot of times when people want to remove the black off of things, that's because, one, they're usually white people, and they haven't dealt with their own issues around the topic of race. How I look at the world, how everyone looks at the world, you've got lenses, we've got glasses, you've got lenses, and you're going to look through the world through these different lenses. The academic word is intersectionality. It's where all these different parts of who you are, how they cross over, how they meet at an intersection. I'm going to look at the world very different because I'm black, because I have black experiences. I tell people when I go into these experiences, I tell them, I said, let's take for example, understanding, theology. Well, they're like, well, if the Bible is the Bible, how come, this preacher will preach this way, but this preacher will preach this way? And I tell them, I said, well, what gives a coffee bean its flavor is where it's grown, the ground that it's in, how much sunlight exposure did it get? What were the other plant elements around it? That's what's going to give the coffee bean its flavor. So that's why a coffee bean from Costa Rica is going to taste different from a coffee bean from Jamaica. It's going to taste different from a coffee bean from Colombia. The environment that you were in will, you're going to get nurtured in that nature. I said, but scripture is scripture. I give you a book to read, you're going to read it based off of who you are. I said, so if all people are kind of like coffee beans, life takes us and it grounds us. I said, but then you've got the faith is going to pour through the coffee bean. If scripture is your filter, then you're going to get this coffee. But I'm a black man raised in the inner city, Generation X. These are the components that make me who I am. So to take away that is to take away part of who I am. As I tell the white congregations, colorblind is not a goal. If anything, you want to be able to say, I see your color, because that's your experience. That's your identity. You want to get to the point where it's not, oh, I'm color blind. It's the idea to the point where I see color and it isn't a dividing factor. But to say I don't see color means you don't see my history, my music, my experience. You know, you miss a huge part of my identity. So yeah, it's when they want to strip that Black piece away, it's problematic. But on the flip side, you can lose yourself if you spend too much time in W.E.D. Du Bois, in his book, The Soul of Black Folks, uses a term. He calls it the double-mindedness of the Negro. That ability to have to think in two different cultures. I have to know all about my Black culture, but I also have to know all about my white culture. White people don't have to learn anything about us. But in order to survive in America, we've got to know about them. So he talks about this, these two pieces. But if you spend too much time in one place, you lose it. The best example I can give, if you think about, movies, is when you have somebody go undercover. Take Deep Cover, Lawrence Fishburne, 1991. It's our introduction to Snoop Dogg, actually. He's on the title track with Dr. Dre. I like movies, I like music. You have these situations where you have spies or you have cops who go undercover for so long, they lose their identity. They forget who they are. They're like, you are not the gangster. You are not, think about Leonardo DiCaprio in The Departed. You lose who you really are because you're spending so much time trying to be something else. That's the danger of code switching for too long. So, and there's some practical things. I got sent to a church once where I had to go into Dayton, Ohio to get hair products for my kids. Because we were the only Black family in the village. Pick what I said, Reg. The village.
The village.
It was a population of 425. I graduated with 500 people, with like 500 kids in my senior class. 425 people in this entire village. Literally a four-way stop in the middle of town. No gas stations, no grocery stores. And so it was, how do I'm going to have to go into Dayton, Ohio to get my kids' hair products. I am going to have to, intentionally go places where there are going to be some non-white people. There are going to be some Black people, to make sure I don't lose touch with that, and that my kids have a certain level of connection to that part of their culture and part of who they are. But yeah, it's important to stay grounded in that. Because you can lose it. You can very easily lose your identity and forget who you are, or where you came from, or that collective piece. And I don't think anyone ever wants to lose their history. And I don't think anyone wants to lose their identity. Black is not all that I am, but it's very important to who I am.
I love that. That's a great quote. You could tell that's a sermon right there. And it's so important, like you said, to be grounded in certain things because they make up who you are, and you kind of got it. And I'm thinking about from even our ancestors and how things got passed down. It was storytelling, it was conversational, it was being in the different conversations, and that's how we pass down traditions and different things. But if you're not a part of it, certain things don't get passed down anymore. One of the questions that I had was when you talk about religion and millennials, and I'm a millennial, so I feel like there's a separation, there's a divide, there's somewhere along the lines, there was a disengagement with the church and millennials. Growing up, I remember my mom used to take me to church on Sundays, and even up to like maybe once or twice when me and my wife got together 10 years ago, we went to church even because of it being ingrained. but I'm no longer ingraining that in my children. Now it's the spiritual journey. It's the, you know what I mean? Like, it was, the church has now gone outside of the building, and it used to be such a staple. And I would love to hear it from your end in the Black community, but I feel like that's shifting. What do you see from your end?
That's a loaded question. It's a complicated one. It's a complicated one, but part of it. So I've got two kids. My son's 27, my daughter's 20. So I have these kind of conversations with their friends. I didn't force them. I didn't push them. I didn't make them come to church with me, because I already knew the levels of pressure they were dealing with being the preacher's kids.
Right.
I think in a lot of ways, the disengagement for a lot of, not just Black millennials, a lot of the European American millennials have this. And I say European because white's a myth. It's some stuff we're working on in my doctoral class. It's conversations about race being a construct, and we're looking at stuff when the U.S. Census Bureau started changing classifications in order to change numbers. Because they realized, in the 1920s, that a lot of the Northern Europeans were beginning to get outnumbered. And so they started changing classifications about what it meant to be white in America, to include groups that up until then they had not considered white in America. So for a lot of millennials, my experience has been, there is a disconnect with the church willing to be authentic and real about what's happening in the world. You've got a generation that saw their parents spend all of this time in church, but didn't see how that carried into Monday to Saturday. You're doing all of this stuff, you're investing all of these pieces into it, but where's the carryover? Where's the transformation? You've got a point in America where where church membership was a status symbol. If you look at a lot of your statistics, a lot of your organizations that were membership based, fraternity numbers are going down, sorority numbers are going down. Elks, Kiwanis, Masons, country clubs. The ability to say, I belong to this church as a status piece doesn't resonate with younger generations. And a lot of that is, I think they saw some of the inauthenticity of some of the leadership. They weren't able to ask questions, or the questions they were asking weren't being answered in a sufficient way. They didn't find a place safe enough to ask some of those questions, to wrestle with the balance between science and faith, to struggle with some of the historic aspects, especially of Western Christianity. Most people don't realize that there is a Western Christianity, there's an Eastern Christianity. Most people don't know that. And so a lot of them have just kind of drifted, there's been these levels of drifting away. But for the Black community, the Black church had always been our safe harbor. In a world full of just where you were seen as less than human, you could show up on a Sunday morning and you would dress to your nines because you had a lot of blue collar jobs.
Right.
You had a lot of people degrading you. It was a place where, you could have that, not just spiritual release, you could have that emotional release. Which is why a lot of Black churches, back in the day used to go 3-4 hours.
It was so much to unpack.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It was that's where the community met. It was the barbershops, it was the church that would raise the money to give the scholarships to the kids graduating from school. It was the church dinners where you sat and you talked and you you were community. But then, as time has gone on, like I said, a lot of those questions that are happening in the world, a lot of churches, my experience has been, it was a very because I say so.
Mm-hmm.
This is what this is what there's what's the phrase I hear all the time? It's one of the phrases that drives me nuts. The Bible said it, I read it, and I believe it. And I was always just thought from an intellectual standpoint, I was like, there's got to be more to this. Why is this? What else is happening there? I had a professor at seminary, Dr. Kim, said, there's what the Bible says, and then there's what the Bible means. And he said, those are two very different types of things.
Is there a third one to that in the way that you interpret it?
Yes. And sometimes interpretations are wrong.
Right.
Sometimes, and that's where, you've got Western Christianity. There's something happening in the academic world right now, which is funny because they started doing it decades ago. The Black theologians were ahead of the curve when a lot of these things are happening now. The term they're using now is called the decolonization of theology. It's looking at a lot of the things where they used the Bible as a weapon to justify slavery, segregation, hostility towards women. But it has happened for so many centuries, you just think this is what it is. Until you start to go look at it and go, well, wait a minute, that's not what this is. If you start looking at it before the colonization started to happen, you start looking at it before Pope Leo's II edict about Africans being outside of the grace of God because they didn't have souls. And you begin to look at how Christianity is understood in other countries. You begin to see, well, wait a minute, a lot of this stuff that we've been given it needs to be decolonized. We need to have these conversations. Like I said, and these conversations have been going on. There's a theologian who just passed away 10 years ago, I want to say. His name is James Cone. He is the father of what's known as Black liberation theology. James Cone may be the synthesis of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King all put together into one Christian context. James Cone's work, he comes up during the late 60s, and he wanted to give a theological voice to the Black Power movement, which was always a tension during the Civil Rights movement. There was that tension with Stokely Carmichael and Martin Luther King. And so he was like, so he's one of your first people who start talking about that God is on the side of the oppressed. But he's a theologian, he's got a PhD in theology. So he has to back these things up with scripture and other historical evidence, mostly scripture. And he was like, well, you look at it, God's always on the side of the oppressed. God's always on the side of the people who are seeking justice. God's always going to be on the side of the marginalized. And he starts pushing this theology. And a lot of white theologians saw it as problematic. A lot of Black people found it encouraging. The last book he wrote before he passed away, his autobiography was released after he died. The last book he wrote was called The Cross and the Lynching Tree, where he's talking about just the problems with Christianity in the South if you were white. But he was explaining how Christianity kept so many Black people encouraged and grounded in who they were. But Cone makes no apology. He was like, I'm a Black man first. He said, because I was Black before I learned Christianity. And he was like, and this is how I have to navigate the world. But yeah, he was, he argued the fact, he was like, Jesus was lynched. He was like,
wow.
the people who were in power didn't like the fact that Jesus was a liberator. He was like, he said, you look at Luke, Luke chapter 3, where Jesus stands up in the temple, he takes a scroll of Isaiah and he says, he finds a part where he's like, I've come to proclaim the favor of the Lord, the release of the captive, the sight to the blind. And then he sits down and he's like, these things have not been fulfilled in your hearing. He's like, everything you read, Jesus is always, he's calling the people in authority out on their misgivings. But he's also telling the people that there's another way to exist in life, that you don't have to live with these oppressions. And because he was a liberator, Cone argues, this is what gets him killed. Because he was trying to let the people know you don't have to be under the boot of, in this case, this is where the decolonization happens. We were talking about this in Bible study last night. People forget that Jesus's country was occupied by Rome. A foreign military power came in and seized their country and had for generations. Kind of like when I talk to pastors in other countries, when they talk about the book of Revelation and, and Babylon, and what they were like, you realize that for us, America's Babylon, right? You guys are the occupying force that the book of Revelation warns about. And so here you have Jesus, this person who is, the Rome has taken over. Right. The Roman soldiers roam in the streets. The church is in cahoots with the emperor, and Jesus is just like, they're always, the people in power are always trying to get him arrested because he's talking revolution. He's talking about, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, give to God what belongs to God. He's flipping over tables in sanctuaries. He's talking about, this internal liberation, this liberation of your mind and your body and your spirit that made the people in power nervous. So you kill it. You don't kill people who aren't threats. Which is why I hate the fact that they have sanitized Martin Luther King so much. When he was killed, 75% of white America hated him. J. Edgar Hoover called him a threat to national security. You don't kill people who aren't threats.
Now, and I'm glad that we have a Pastor Leo to be able to weave in these conversations. You bring enough intellect, you bring enough Black, you bring enough all these different, you occupy a space where you can have this conversation where it makes it relatable to a person like myself. Whereas if you take the Black out, if you take the intellect, I may not even understand. You may be talking way past my head, like Neil deGrasse Tyson. I feel like sometimes I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about at this point, but it helps when you have a person that comes from these different backgrounds that could kind of speak multiple languages.
Oh yeah, you've got to be able to make those connections. And so I think for a lot of millennials, the fact that they weren't hearing this from their pulpits became problematic. You're hearing a lot of purity culture stuff. Save your virginity save it till marriage and this and that. But no one's talking about, look, if you're gonna do this, let's be responsible about this. Let's be here. Would we prefer you to because there's an emotional connection that scientists talk about with hormones when you start having sex, and there's a lot of science now that the church didn't really understand. That they were like, you should save yourself, but they did not really understand why. But now we understand it's about the hormonal connections that happen when you're having sex. But I'm just like, how do we keep it honest and how do we keep it real? But that was the world I grew up at. My dad's a preacher. I'm in high school. I'm getting ready to go out with the boys, and my mom's like, "You got Jimmy hats?"
Right. Keep your Jimmy with you.
And it's just like, yeah. And I'm thinking, I'm now the whole black geek thing is popular, but in the late 80s and the early 90s, it wasn't. I was like I'm gonna need this anyway. But it was the fact, I had parents who were gonna be honest about this.
Right.
If you're, as opposed to the church, to use the language, church faking the funk. We know you out here doing this, so let's talk about how you do this and be responsible.
Right.
Would we prefer you not do this? Yeah. But if you are, let's at least have a conversation about how to be safe. It is a lot of the glitz and the glamour. A lot of the millennials just saw it, they saw a lot of it as just, being fake.
Mm-hmm.
It was a lot of performance. Sunday morning, it's really, it's like, this isn't, how genuine is this? A lot of people weren't willing to, to wrestle with some of these harder pieces. How do you, look, like I said before, how do you look at a piece? How do you look at a faith tradition that was once used to just destroy 3 cultures? If you want to talk about the colonization going into Africa, the Native Americans, and then the Pacific Rim. But when you step back and you go, that wasn't the original intent of it.
And I think that's what got lost in the mix of all the conversation, and with people like you on the forefront having these type of conversation, it'll bring some of the essence back of why it was needed. So much so, and I don't want to leave off of that part because I know your time is limited, but I wanted to ask you more about what you spoke on earlier when you said I have a reverend for a father, but I also was in therapy too. I think
Yes.
there was a divide between the mental health community and the religious community where they couldn't be integrated. Can you talk about that and how you make sure that, and you say it all the time, like I'm a Black man, I'm a pastor, and I have a therapist. I have all of those in above. So just talk about that unique intersection.
Yeah, therapy is huge. If you're if you are involved in any type of dealing with people on a regular basis, I don't understand how you don't have a therapist. But in a lot of cases, in a lot of churches, it was you don't need a therapist. You just need to pray. And I was like, no, that's not how this works. You see a doctor. You've got something going on with your body, you see a doctor. At least you're supposed to. There's some faith traditions that are, don't believe in doctors. Another sermon for another time. It was the understanding that my faith compelled me to make sure let me back up. So part of our ordination process is we have to take a psyche vow, where they will ordain us. We have to take, and then based off of what your evaluation is, they will either make you go to see a therapist or they'll suggest you go see a therapist. But either way, you take your psyche vow, you have to meet with a therapist to go over your results. So they can figure out, these are things you need to work on. These are your strengths. These are blind spots. Because you don't want unhealthy people helping people. You don't want people who have got, you don't want them, as we say, you don't want to be bleeding on the congregation. But because mental health has always been such a stigma in the Black community, at least it was when I was growing up, it was, shrinks, is what they used to call them when I was coming up. They called them shrinks. Shrinks are for white people. Those are white people problems. But it wasn't until I met that first I've had 4 therapists in the last 20 years. They've all shown up at different points in my life. It was after meeting with that first therapist that I realized and got the vocabulary and the language that my dad was a manic depressive. But growing up, it was just, we were just like, hey, dad's in one of his moods. You know, you come home from school at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and all the blackout curtains are drawn.
Mm.
And he's just sitting in this, he's sitting in this lazy boy, just kind of with this expression where you're like, if you make the wrong noise, Dad might explode. But then there are other times, Dad was the life of the party. Everybody loved Rev. He was Mr. Personality. And now I realize those were manic episodes.
Mm.
And you're coming, and then he would have these things. We had these depressive episodes. You know, when he would sit in the basement and would play the same 45, because, you know, that's how old I am. He would play the same 45 record for an hour, the same song for an hour. Then you realize, oh, he was trying to figure out how to get out of one of these moods he was in. So he was isolating himself away from the family, and he was just playing the same song, trying to get out of whatever was happening. But it wasn't until I started talking to the therapist, I was like, oh, that's what was going on with Dad. He would, you know, Dad's in one of those moods. Oh no, Dad's manic. No, Dad's manic depressive. Had the language existed, and had the community had those pieces, and eventually as Dad got older, he began to understand the importance of therapy before he died. But I think it's a crucial part of just, you have, you know, if you get in legal trouble, you find you a lawyer. If you're in trouble, if you have a physical issue, you see a doctor. In doctors, you see specific doctors. You got orthopedic doctors, you got physical therapists. You know, if you're having a financial situation, for those who have the resources, you see somebody to help you with your money. Why would we think we wouldn't have to go see somebody to help with our mind?
No, and it's so important you said that. And Pastor Leo, and I don't know if the episode is out already. I can't remember. I just had a conversation with a therapist on the podcast where I'm like, and you know this from experience as a preacher, when you make it look easy, everyone think they can do it. And so I think there has been such a disrespect to the art form that is, or the skill set. I don't even call it an art form, the skill set that is being a therapist. And it's like, oh, if you're gonna go pay somebody to talk to me. You pay me that money, I could talk to you. And it's like, no, you are disrespectful to the skill sets and what is actually happening in this conversation. And that's why you don't value it as much as you need it. Like you said, with a lawyer, you value that. You know, you can't represent yourself. You have the ability, you can learn it, but you know, you respect that craft enough to do it. Same thing with heart surgery. You know, you can learn it, go to school, but you wouldn't try to do it on yourself. Therapy is probably one of the most disrespected skill sets, because it looks like, oh, you're just talking to a person, not realizing what's being happened.
Oh, absolutely. The therapist will ask you questions that you would never think to ask yourself. They have the follow-up questions, because, you know, so much of therapy, at least from my experience, has been, it's then trying to pull out what already is inside of you. You just don't know that it's there. You're unaware of the fact. You know, they're guides. They're like, let me help you unpack this. It's like, you know, a good teacher won't tell you what the answer is, but they'll tell you where to go to look for it. And so you can go that way. You can go and you can discover it yourself. But yeah, people don't value the significance of the therapist, of the work that goes into understanding the background and the questions and the insights and the things they have to look for. And oh wait, this key phrase. Why did you say that? Why did you say this? I'll give you one. This one was more challenging. My current therapist, because I've got through the health insurance, the employee assistance program, they assigned, it was like, hey, we're going to assign you, this is a therapist who's got a time slot available. And so my current therapist is middle-aged white. It was I thought it was going to be a real challenge to process the summer of 2020 with a middle-aged white lady. But what I discovered was, from talking to my Black friends who have Black therapists, they were like, well, they're like we're going through all this stuff. Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, we were that was 2020 was a wild summer. Got Trump trying to get reelected,
right?
And a lot of them were, they're talking to their Black therapists, and they were like, well, you know what I'm saying. And the therapist would be like, oh yeah, I completely get it. There's some value to that. But then to have this white therapist go, how is this making you feel? I couldn't cop out and go, well, you know what it's like being Black in America. I actually had to sit down and articulate what I was feeling, as opposed to being able to just go, you know what it's like. You're married, you got kids, man. Yeah, Reg, you know what it's like. But maybe we don't, because we have an age difference.
Right.
I'm divorced. I was married for 22 years before I got divorced.
Right.
So I can't, you're in, you grew up on the East Coast. I grew up in the Midwest, even though people in the Midwest think Ohio is the East Coast. But if you don't take the time to articulate it, you could miss something. If I just say, oh yeah, you know what it's like, and you agree with me, oh yeah, but there might be something unique you're dealing with.
Yeah, that could impact you in a way where you're not even realizing it, unless it's like, I know I got a version of what it feels like, but how does that impact you? That's a whole different, different ping pong back and forth. And I'll say that to you, Pastor Leo. I'm learning that now. I got a homework assignment due it in a few minutes, so I definitely understand that. I want to get you out of here because I know you got a hard stop coming up. So, are there?
No one has texted me. We're okay for right now.
Well, I was going to ask, one of my final questions was, just how do you feel overall as it relates to like mental health? Again, we're coming from two different experiences. As you see the landscape start to grow around Black mental health, like what, as a leader, how do you see the state of mental health in the Black community?
It's getting better, but it's not where it needs to be. I'm glad the conversation is happening. I am glad that there are more Black people who are taking the time and and the efforts to understand the significance of your mental health. It affects so much of your life, but there need to be more efforts. I mean, that's how I got, when I saw, Black Men Heal, oddly enough, popping up on my Instagram. It was a sponsor, and when I first started to see it, I was like, okay, it's like, all right, somebody's selling t-shirts. Okay. That's all over Instagram, and I started reading about it, and I was like, okay, all right, okay, part of the proceeds for the t-shirts and the sweatshirts, so, are going to provide therapy in Philadelphia. I'm like, okay. And then I thought about it, and I was like, I said, I'm privileged enough to have resources where I've seen 4 therapists. Saw one for ordination, saw one after my dad died, saw one during the divorce.
Oh, did I lose you? Uh-oh, did I lose you?
No. Are you there?
Yeah,
there we go. All right.
I didn't know I lost you.
Now I'm still here. One of us froze up. So
the last thing I heard was you saw one during the divorce.
Yeah, I saw a therapist. During my divorce, and then I realized I had gone about 3 years and not seen a therapist. And I was like, oh, this is like this. I'm like, I wouldn't miss a physical. I need to go get. I'm like, I get these 8 free sessions every year with the health insurance. Let me go check in with somebody. But when I saw the stuff with Black Men Heal, I realized, hey, I'm privileged enough to be able to see somebody, and I know what good that's done me. The Black pastors I know, we talk about this, and we talk about we have to be more open with our people. That if our people know, hey, I'm getting my physical, I'm going to go get, I'm going to be 50 this year. So I got to do the whole prostate, the colon. I'm going to get, if they know we're doing these things, you want to model the behavior. If you're a leader, you have to model this behavior. And so when I saw you guys ran a special, it was a sweatshirt and a t-shirt deal.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, But then I saw y'all had sweatshirts in my size, which is very rare to come across anybody carrying a 5X sweatshirt. I was like, okay. I was like, how do I not? But I have had more conversations with the sweatshirt. I've got the black one that's got the red, the black, and the green, where it says Black Men Heal.
Oh, let me see if I can pull it up. Go ahead, keep talking.
Okay. And a lot of people will see the men heal, and they'll be like, "Oh, okay, men heal," but then they'll see the Black men heal, and it gives me an opportunity to talk about, to rep for y'all, and to talk about the importance of, understanding that a lot of brothers, man, we gone through some trauma that we have never. Now, I want you to understand this picture. This is my sanctuary. This is the church where I'm the pastor. I am walking around an all-white congregation, rocking that sweatshirt with my kente cloth COVID mask. I'm gonna be black wherever I go. What's the line Sam Jackson had in A Long Kiss Goodbye? I don't have to do anything but be black and die.
That's it.
So there I am running around, in this, in my Black Men, my Black Men Heal, Black Mental Health sweatshirt, advocating for this fact. And I know it is, there have been some other people, other ethnicities, because I've talked about the importance of the mental health, because I've talked about, your mind is going to affect how you see the world and how you interact with the world. How do you not get that checked? But checked by a professional. And I know a lot of times, like you said, oh, you can just come talk to anybody. I'll give you this one last story. My first quarter, 1999, Intro to New Testament, Methodist Theological School in Ohio. Dr. Kempton Hewitt looked like Gandalf from Lord of the Rings, short white dude, beard, long hair. He said, this is Intro to New Testament. And he said, I have decided that my job from now on at this seminary is to have you stop sending clients to my wife. Now we're all sitting there like, what? And he says it again. And he says, I've decided I'm going to spend the rest of my career making sure you all stop sending clients to my wife. We're all looking around. He goes, oh, I'm sorry. Let me explain. My wife is Dr. Fawn Hewitt. She is the director of the psychiatric unit at the Delaware Hospital. He said, you would not believe how many people end up in the psych ward because of stupid things their pastors have told them. He said, so I have decided that I'm going to make sure you understand the New Testament in a way that you are not going to cause harm to your parishioners and send these people to my wife's psych ward because you misunderstood something written in the New Testament. I was just like, wow.
You was like, what?
my man's, he basically said, you pastors are causing mental health harm. Because you are saying things and you are doing things and you are misinterpreting things. You are giving people bad life advice because they want to come talk to the pastor and talk to the therapist. Our seminary has a pastoral counseling specialization. When we're required to take basic pastoral counseling, then I took African-American pastoral counseling because our historical experience means we process the world in a very different way. But you can actually get a degree in pastoral counseling, but you have to sit for your state boards like you would, like any other counselor would. But what we learned in that first intro to pastoral counseling was If it is a conversation that lasts more than 3 meetings, refer. Punt. They told us they're punt. After 3 sessions, you should be able to figure out, is this a spiritual issue or is this a mental health issue? And they told us that most of you are only going to take the 2 required classes for the master's degree. You aren't going to take the other specializations, those details that we talked about before, where the therapist has to learn these extra things. They're like, so we're going to teach you just enough to figure out, is this a spiritual issue or is this a mental issue? If it's a mental issue, you aren't trained to do anything with that. Punt. Get a referral list, start finding out when you get moved to these different cities, start meeting, start networking to figure out where these therapists are, so you don't end up giving bad advice. But also understanding that even if it's a spiritual issue, if the mental is thrown off, they can't comprehend what you're saying. Much in the same way, your nutrition affects your mind. Oh, these kids are so bad in school, they're acting up. Well, if the kid hasn't had breakfast, it's going to affect their ability to pay attention. So you have to ask yourself, is this a neurological? A lot of mental health things are chemical. So it doesn't matter if we're talking about, you need, about your prayer life or your spirituality. If you're having, a serotonin issue, no matter what I'm going to tell you, you're not going to process it. So our seminary was really intentional about going, for those of you who feel a calling towards counseling services, these are the classes. This is what you have to do. You have to sit for your state boards. But we're going to give you enough to understand if a person is grieving, how do you show counseling care for a person who is grieving? If, it's these natural pieces of life. But they were like, but you are not being trained to become therapists. Most of you aren't. No to punt. No to refer away. No to not send people to the psych ward.
Right.
Because you want to misquote or misinterpret something from the Bible, because now I'm trying not to be a bit of a snob. A lot of people who are pastors don't have any real formal background.
Pastor Leo.
They don't have the training. They don't understand, today's Tuesday, sermon prep day. Classic example where Jesus talks about turning the other cheek. When if you don't know the cultural context for that, you will misinterpret what's being said. It's a Middle Eastern context. Middle Eastern culture is a very right-hand dominant culture. You do everything's with your right hand, but you clean yourself with your left. So if you're in a right-hand dominant culture and we're having a back and forth, and I want to degrade you, and I go to slap you, and these are things that carry over. So if somebody backhands you, that's pretty disrespectful.
Right.
You catch, you talk about in the streets in Detroit, Toledo, you catch in the back with pimp hand like this. If somebody does that, that's next we got to fight. Well, not anymore. In my old life, now we fight. You're throwing a backhand. But if I backhand you and you turn your cheek and tell me to hit you again, I now have to hit you like this if you turn your cheek to me. Well, or I got to turn my hand this way. I ain't no power in trying to slap you like that. I got to slap you this way. But now by slapping you this way, now I've said you're an equal. Because somebody you're equal with, you'll slap this way. Somebody who's beneath you, you'll slap this way. So, okay, you want to hit me, huh? All right. Now I'm going to take the power back. Hit me again. Hit me on this side. Ooh, if I hit you on this side, now I'm declaring we're equals. And I've already said that we're not by backhanding you. So I'm not going to hit you again. because now that's going to show that you're in control of the situation.
Right.
But if you got somebody that's never been, even if you, I mean, this is, even if they've never, seminary is expensive. Whoo, seminary is expensive. I got student loans and a used car. So the whole thing about preachers getting paid off of people, I'm like, no.
Yeah, it was so many dynamics that I wanted to dive into about that. Like, and like you said, divorce, it's so many things, but as y'all can see, Pastor Leo could take it anywhere, any conversation anyway. So he will be back to have more conversations. Like I said, I want to be respectful of his time and making sure that he goes and be able to fulfill the rest of his day. So I wanted to even promote the podcast you got, all these different things you got going on. But again, you'll be back. I promise he will be back, and we'll have future conversations. Do you got any last words that you want to leave the people until next time?
Black men, there's nothing wrong with asking for help. There's nothing wrong with that. You think about it, you ask, if you were in sports, you had a coach who taught you these things. Black women, there's nothing wrong with asking for help. Somebody taught you the things that you know. This whole idea that we can make it on our own and do it by ourselves and figure it out it's a lie. We were never meant to go through this by ourselves in any aspect of life. We're supposed to have partners. We're supposed to have tribes. We're supposed to make sure we are connected. Find a way to get connected with some people who are real, who are authentic, who will hold you accountable, but will also give you support. That's the thing. I give this here. This might be one of my favorite quotes. We'll close it on this one, because I've got a sermon to finish writing, and I got church stuff to do, and I got one kid who's under the weather. All right, here it is. Support without accountability promotes moral weakness.
Ooh.
Accountability without support is a form of cruelty. Support without accountability promotes moral weakness. Accountability without support is a form of cruelty. Find you somebody who will support you, but will also hold you accountable.
On that note, make sure you follow Pastor Leo and all of the different quotes and things that he put up. I'll make sure to have his Instagram information over top of our heads. And please remember, before I exit out, to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. That helps the podcast grow. Subscribe, share this message with somebody, clip it up, share it, and let them know Pastor Lee is over here on the Black Mental Health Podcast, dropping gems. And on that note, and make sure you subscribe. Remember that this platform has never been about being a replacement to therapy. It's an alternative place where people share therapeutic stories. Thank you for listening.